I'm Mason Collins, 28, and I thought coming home for Christmas meant family dinners and exchanging gifts. Instead, I found a dark house and my grandfather Walter eating a sandwich alone at the kitchen table. The note on the fridge knocked the wind out of me. Use your money for Dylan's treatment. Watch him for the week. Grandpa looked up, his eyes harder than I remembered. They'll regret this, he whispered. I should have been angry, but instead I smiled. 3 days later, they were at my door, panicking. If you're watching from your warm home this holiday season, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens when family takes advantage of the wrong person. The Seattle to Philadelphia flight had been grueling. 6 hours with a crying baby behind me, followed by turbulence that had even the flight attendants looking nervous. But I didn't care. After 2 years of building my career as a software engineer at a cybersecurity firm, I was finally going home for Christmas. My carry-on was stuffed with gifts I'd carefully selected: a vintage watch for Dad, designer perfume for Mom, and a custom gaming laptop for my younger brother Dylan. The presents had cost me a small fortune, but I could afford it now. I wanted to show them how far I'd come. The phone calls with my parents over the past month had been filled with excitement. Mom kept talking about her special turkey recipe and how she decorated the house. Dad mentioned neighborhood festivities and old friends who wanted to see me. Even Dylan, usually distant and wrapped up in his own world, had texted me twice asking when I'd arrive. Just wait until you see the Christmas tree, Mom had said during our last call. We went all out this year. The cab driver seemed surprised when I gave him my parents' address. Haverbrook area on Christmas Eve? Thought everyone there would be having fancy parties tonight, he remarked, eyeing me in the rearview mirror. As we drove through the familiar streets, I noticed changes in the neighborhood. The Davidson house had been repainted. The old oak tree at the corner was gone. New businesses had replaced the shops I remembered from childhood. Yet there was still that sense of coming home, that invisible pull toward the place where I grew up. The first sign something was wrong came when we turned onto my street. Every house was lit up with Christmas decorations, except ours. No lights, no inflatable Santa, no wreath on the door. Just darkness. You sure this is the right place? The driver asked, peering through the windshield. I'm sure. I paid him and dragged my suitcase up the driveway, an uneasy feeling growing in my stomach. I tried the front door. Locked. I fished out my old key, relieved when it still worked. The house was silent and cold. No Christmas music. No smell of baking. No voices calling out to welcome me. Hello? I called, switching on the hallway light. Mom? Dad? Anyone home? A faint clattering sound came from the kitchen. I followed it, finding my grandfather Walter sitting alone at the table, eating what looked like a hastily made sandwich. Grandpa? I set down my bags. Where is everyone? Walter looked up, a mixture of surprise and what I could only describe as vindication crossing his weathered face. He moved in with my parents after my grandmother passed away last year, but I'd expected him to be part of the family celebration, not sitting alone in a dark kitchen. Mason. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, son. That's when I saw it, a note on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a snowman that I'd made in elementary school. The handwriting was my mother's, unmistakable in its precise cursive. Mason, use your money for Dylan's treatment. Emergency came up. We're away for the week. Dylan arrives tomorrow morning. Watch him until we're back. Food in freezer. Mom and Dad. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. Use your money. What money? I checked my phone, opening my banking app with trembling fingers. My emergency savings account, which had held $15,000 yesterday, now showed a balance of $126.49. They left this morning, Walter said quietly. Packed up like they were fleeing something. Did they say anything to you? I asked, still staring at my phone in disbelief. Just that Dylan needed special treatments, and they had to take him somewhere. Asked me if I could stay at my buddy Frank's place for the week. He took another bite of his sandwich. I refused. This is my home too now. I immediately tried calling my mother. The call went straight to voicemail. Same with my father's phone. I sent texts that remained undelivered. Walter watched me, his eyes surprisingly clear and alert for his 78 years. They'll regret this, he said, his voice low but firm. I should have been shouting, throwing things, breaking down. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the culmination of years of putting my family first while suspecting I was never their priority. Either way, I found myself nodding. Yes, I said quietly. I think they will. After that initial shock wore off, I began exploring the house, looking for clues about what had actually happened. My parents' bedroom closet was half empty, with hangers askew as if clothes had been grabbed hastily. The bathroom was missing their toiletries. In my father's office, the desk drawers hung open. Papers scattered as if someone had searched through them in a hurry. I sat at his computer and turned it on, grateful that Dad never changed his password from my childhood dog's name. The browser history told the story: searches for best all-inclusive resorts Cancun, last-minute Christmas vacation deals, and can you use someone else's money in emergency? My hands shook as I pulled up my own bank records again. The withdrawal had been made at 9:17 that morning, an electronic transfer from my savings to my parents' joint account. They needed my account number and password to do it, information I'd shared with my mother years ago during college when she occasionally deposited money for textbooks. I'd never changed those credentials, never thinking I'd need to protect myself from my own parents. I found Walter in the living room, flipping through a photo album. How long has this been going on? I asked him, sitting heavily on the couch. Walter sighed. Your parents have always been creative with money. But it's gotten worse since your brother's diagnosis. Dylan had been diagnosed with a chronic condition 2 years ago. Not life-threatening, but requiring regular treatments and medication. My parents had called occasionally asking for help with his medical bills, which I'd always provided without question. Family helps family, that's what I believed. Is Dylan really getting special treatments? I asked. Walter's expression hardened. He has appointments twice a month at the clinic in town. Nothing emergency about it. And his insurance covers most of it. He closed the photo album. This isn't the first time they've used him as an excuse. He proceeded to tell me about the pattern that had emerged since I moved away. My parents had systematically borrowed money from various family members, always using Dylan's condition as the reason. My Aunt Patricia had remortgaged her house to help them. Uncle Curtis had depleted his retirement fund. Even Walter himself had signed over his monthly pension checks for almost a year. But they always had such good explanations, I said weakly, remembering the detailed stories my mother would tell about Dylan's needs. Your mother could sell sand in a desert, Walter replied. Always could. I tried calling my parents again. This time from Walter's phone in case they were avoiding mine. After 6 rings, my mother answered. Walter? Is everything okay? Her voice sounded distant, with music and laughter in the background. It's Mason, Mom. Where are you? A long pause. Mason! You're early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. The lie came so easily to her that I almost doubted my own memory. My flight was scheduled for today. I'm at the house now. With Grandpa. Oh. Well, there's been a change of plans. Dylan needed. Don't, I interrupted. Don't lie to me again. I know you're in Cancun. I know you took my money. I know Dylan is fine and will be arriving tomorrow for me to watch while you're on vacation. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming defensive. It was an emergency. We've been so stressed with Dylan's care. The doctors said we needed a break or we'd have health problems ourselves. We were going to pay you back. With what money, Mom? The money you borrowed from Aunt Patricia? Or from Uncle Curtis? Or from Grandpa's pension? The line went silent for a moment. We'll discuss this when we get back. Dylan needs you right now. That's what matters. When will you be back? Next Thursday. His medicine is in the cabinet above the sink. Make sure he takes it with food. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, the resort is just beautiful, Mason. You should see the pools. You work too hard anyway. A vacation would do you good too. The call ended before I could respond. I sat there, phone in hand, utterly stunned by her ability to pivot from being caught in a major betrayal to suggesting I should also take a vacation. Walter put his hand on my shoulder. They've been doing this for years, son. They won't change unless they're forced to. That night, I slept in my old bedroom, surrounded by high school trophies and faded posters that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I stared at the ceiling, remembering all the times I'd defended my parents to friends who thought they were too demanding or manipulative. All the times I'd sent money without question. All the family events I'd organized and paid for, believing I was the appreciated elder son. For the first time, I saw the pattern clearly, and I began to form a plan. Dylan arrived at 8:30 the next morning, delivered by a medical transport service I recognized from my online research as one of the most expensive in the area. The driver helped him inside, along with a small suitcase and a bag of medications. My brother looked better than I expected. At 22, he was thin but not frail, with our father's height and our mother's dark eyes. His condition, an autoimmune disorder that primarily affected his joints, sometimes made walking difficult, but today he moved with only a slight limp. Mason? He seemed genuinely surprised to see me. Mom said you'd be here, but I figured you'd cancel once you found out they were gone. I gave him a hug, noting how he tensed slightly before returning it. We'd never been close, with 6 years between us and vastly different interests. Still, he was my brother, and I was increasingly certain he was as much a victim in all this as anyone. Why would I cancel? I came home to spend Christmas with family. Your family? Dylan's eyes darted around the room. Where's Grandpa? Making breakfast. Real breakfast. Not that meal replacement shake Mom usually gives you. A small smile. She says it's better for my inflammation. Is it? He shrugged. Tastes like chalk mixed with artificial strawberry. But I got used to it. Over Walter's impressive spread of eggs, bacon, and toast, Dylan gradually opened up. He'd been told I couldn't come home for Christmas because I was too busy with my important job. He'd been told the family couldn't afford Christmas presents this year because his treatments had depleted their savings. He'd been told they were taking him to a special clinic in Mexico that offered experimental treatments. But last night, they dropped me at Aunt Patricia's, saying you'd pick me up today. Then this morning, the transport service came instead. He pushed his eggs around the plate. I'm not stupid, you know. I know something's going on. Something is definitely going on. I agreed. But it's not what you think. Your treatments aren't bankrupting the family. Mom and Dad are in Cancun at an all-inclusive resort, using money they took from my account without permission. Dylan's fork clattered against his plate. What? No way. Walter nodded gravely. It's true, kiddo. They'd been playing this game for a while now. I pulled out my phone and showed Dylan the screenshots I'd taken of my bank account, my parents' browser history, and the resort booking confirmation I'd found in my father's email. His face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally, a resigned sort of sadness that made him look much older than his years. I'm their excuse, aren't I? He said quietly. For everything. You're not responsible for their actions, I told him firmly. After breakfast, I called Haley, my girlfriend of 2 years. She listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. "I'll be on the next flight," she said immediately. "You don't have to do that. Your family is expecting you for Christmas. Mason, your family stole from you and abandoned you on Christmas with a made-up emergency. I think my parents will understand if I tell them my boyfriend needs me." Her loyalty brought the first genuine smile to my face since I'd arrived home. While Dylan rested, Walter and I sat at the kitchen table with all the financial documents we could find. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. My parents were nearly $200,000 in debt, with multiple credit cards maxed out. They'd taken loans from at least 5 family members, including $30,000 from Walter. Their mortgage was 3 months behind in payments, and there was a notice of potential foreclosure. "They're underwater," I murmured, staring at the stack of bills. "How did it get this bad?" Walter shook his head. "Your father never met a get-rich-quick scheme he didn't like. Your mother never saw a luxury she didn't deserve." Between his bad investments and her spending, they'd been digging this hole for decades. I thought about my childhood, how we'd always seemed to live just slightly beyond our means. The vacations that came right after Dad's big breaks. The new cars that appeared when Mom decided our old ones weren't appropriate for a family of our standing. The private school tuition that had nearly broken them but that Mom insisted was necessary for our future success. I called my friend Marcus, who practiced family and financial law. After explaining the situation, I asked, "What are my options here? Legally? You could report the bank withdrawal as fraud, since you didn't authorize it. You could sue them for the money they took. You could potentially even press charges, though that's the nuclear option." He paused. "But Mason, these are your parents. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I'm not sure of anything right now," I admitted. "But I need to know my options." He promised to email me information about financial abuse and family law in Pennsylvania, along with some potential courses of action. By evening, I had started documenting everything. The unauthorized withdrawal, the pattern of exploitation, the abandonment of Dylan, the neglect of Walter. I created a secure cloud folder with all the evidence, including recorded conversations where my grandfather and brother detailed their experiences. Walter watched me work, occasionally providing additional information about past incidents. "Your grandmother suspected something wasn't right with their finances," he told me. "She wanted to talk to you about it before she passed, but she didn't want to come between you and your parents." "I wish she had," I said quietly. "She was old school. Family business stays in the family." He smiled sadly. "But I think she'd approve of what you're doing now. Sometimes family needs tough love." That night, as Dylan slept in his room and Walter dozed in front of the TV, I sat alone with my thoughts. I loved my parents, of course I did. Who had been quiet and withdrawn, perked up as she engaged him in conversation about his interest in digital art. "You should see Mason's company's design department," she told him. "They're always looking for people with your eye for detail." The idea of Dylan potentially working with me in Seattle planted a seed in my mind. Maybe there was a way to help him break free from our parents' manipulation too. With Haley's help, I spent the afternoon setting up security measures. We changed the locks on the house, installed a simple security camera system I'd ordered for overnight delivery, and secured all important documents in a lockbox I'd brought from Seattle. "You're really serious about this?" Haley observed as she helped me organize the evidence. "They crossed the line," I replied. "This isn't just about the money. It's about years of manipulation and using Dylan's health as a tool to exploit family members. It has to stop." Walter had been watching us work with increasing interest. At 78, he was still sharp and now seemed energized by the prospect of standing up to my parents. "Your grandmother would have done this years ago if she'd known the extent of it," he said, handing me another folder of financial documents he'd found. "She was the backbone in our relationship. After she died, I just gave in to their demands. Easier than fighting." I put my hand on his shoulder. Not anymore, Grandpa. That evening, I received my first communication from my parents since the previous day's call. A text from my mother read, "Dylan needs his special protein shake with dinner. Make sure he takes his evening pills. Resort is amazing. Miss you." No mention of the missing money. No acknowledgement that it was Christmas and they'd abandoned their family. Just instructions about Dylan and a vacation update. I showed the text to Dylan, who scoffed. "I haven't had those protein shakes in months. My doctor said they were unnecessary and overpriced." Another piece of the puzzle. I added the text to my evidence file. Later that night, as we all sat watching a Christmas movie, Dylan turned to me. "What's going to happen when they come back?" I considered my answer carefully. "That depends partly on them. But things won't go back to how they were before. I can promise you that." He nodded slowly. "Good. Because I don't think I can keep living like this either." For the first time, I saw my brother not as the sickly kid who always got our parents' attention, but as another victim of their manipulation. They'd used his condition to isolate him, to make him dependent, to justify their financial exploitation of others. And in the process, they'd robbed him of his independence and dignity. That night, I added another element to my plan. Helping Dylan build a life separate from our parents' influence, just as I had done by moving to Seattle. The next day, December 26th, I received an alert from my bank that my parents had attempted to make another withdrawal from my account, this time from their resort in Cancun. The transfer had been blocked. Within an hour, my phone was ringing. "Mason, there's a problem with the bank," my father said, his voice tense. "We tried to access your emergency fund for a situation here, but it's not working." "What kind of situation?" I asked calmly. "Your mother, she needs to see a doctor. Something she ate at the buffet." The lie was so transparent it would have been funny if it weren't so sad. I could hear music and laughter in the background, just as I had during the call with my mother. "I've frozen all my accounts, Dad. The $15,000 you already took is being investigated as fraud." A long silence. Then, "Son, I don't know what you think happened, but we had an arrangement. You agreed to help with Dylan's medical expenses." "I did. And I would have given you money if you'd asked honestly. But you didn't ask, you took. And you lied about why you needed it. We don't owe you explanations about how we care for your brother," he said, his voice hardening. "We're his parents. And I'm your son. Not your personal ATM." The call ended abruptly. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding but my resolve strengthening. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to my father's manipulation. Haley came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "You okay?" I nodded. "Actually, I am. Better than I have been in a long time." The rest of the day was spent preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Marcus sent over legal documents outlining my rights and potential courses of action. I spoke with my Aunt Patricia and Uncle Curtis, who were shocked to learn the full extent of my parents' deception, but immediately offered their support. "They told us you refused to help with Dylan's treatments," Aunt Patricia said, her voice breaking. "That you were too busy with your new life to care about family." The revelation stung, but it didn't surprise me. Of course they would try to turn family members against each other. Divide and conquer. "I'm sorry they put you in that position," I told her. "But things are going to change now." By evening, we had allies, evidence, and a clear strategy. My parents had spent years building a house of cards based on lies and manipulation. In just 3 days, we had gathered enough to bring it all tumbling down. As we finalized our preparations, I noticed a change in Walter. He stood straighter. His voice was stronger. The defeated look in his eyes had been replaced by determination. Even Dylan seemed transformed, asking questions and offering insights about our parents' patterns of behavior that only someone who had lived with them continuously could provide. We were no longer victims waiting for the next exploitation. We were a team, ready to establish new boundaries and demand respect. That night, my mother texted again. Account problem still not fixed. Need money immediately. Dylan has appointment scheduled for when we return. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say until we could talk face to face. Instead, I checked the security cameras, made sure all our documentation was in order, and went to bed early. The next day would bring the final preparations before my parents' return. The confrontation was coming, and for the first time, I was ready for it. On the morning of December 27th, my phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, voicemails, and emails from both my parents came flooding in, each more urgent than the last. Emergency! Call immediately! Why aren't you answering? This is serious! Your brother needs you to release the funds now. I reviewed each message with Haley, Walter, and Dylan. Noting how the tone shifted from demanding to pleading to threatening within the span of an hour. Classic manipulation tactics, Haley observed. Create a false emergency, apply pressure. Then switch to guilt when that doesn't work. Dylan nodded, a sad recognition in his eyes. They do this to me all the time. When I wanted to apply to art school last year, Mom suddenly had a health scare that required my full attention for weeks. By the time it mysteriously resolved, the application deadline had passed. I forwarded all the messages to my secure folder, adding them to our growing collection of evidence. Then I sent a single, carefully worded response. We'll discuss everything when you return. The reply came almost instantly. We're coming home early. Flight arrives tomorrow morning. They were cutting their week-long vacation short after just 3 days. The loss of access to my funds had clearly triggered panic, exactly as I'd anticipated. Sooner than we expected, Walter said. But we're ready. Throughout the day, we continued our preparations. Marcus arrived with printed copies of all legal documents we might need, including the fraud report from my bank, documentation of previous loans my parents had taken from family members, and a formal proposal for financial restitution. Remember, he advised, the goal isn't to punish them. It's to establish boundaries and create accountability. I spent 2 hours on the phone with extended family members, explaining the situation and asking for their support. Most were initially shocked, then angry, then resigned. Many had suspected something wasn't right but hadn't wanted to rock the boat. Your mother convinced me you were too busy for family matters, my Uncle Curtis said. Said you made it clear you didn't want to be bothered with Dylan's problems. She told me you had gambling issues and that's why you stayed away from family gatherings. And Patricia added that you were embarrassed about losing all your money. Each revelation was like a knife, but also a confirmation that I was doing the right thing. My parents hadn't just exploited family financially, they'd systematically isolated me by destroying my reputation with lies. By evening, we had confirmations from 5 family members that they would be present for the confrontation. Not to attack my parents, but to present a united front against further manipulation. Dylan, who had been quiet most of the day, finally spoke up during dinner. I want to go back to Seattle with you, he said suddenly. After all this is over. I looked at him in surprise. What about your treatments here? Dr. Ramirez already told me I could transfer my care to any rheumatologist. My condition is stable. He pushed his food around his plate. I'm never going to have a life if I stay here. They'll always use my health as an excuse to control everything. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We'll make it happen. Later that night, I received a call from an unknown number. It was the manager of my parents' bank, responding to an inquiry I'd made about their financial situation. Mr. Collins? I can't give you specific details due to privacy regulations, she said carefully, but I can confirm that the pattern of transactions you described is consistent with what we're seeing. If you're concerned about other financial abuse regarding your grandfather, I would recommend contacting Adult Protective Services. Another piece of confirmation. I thanked her and added notes about the call to our documentation. As midnight approached, I sat on the back porch with Haley, looking at the stars and thinking about how much had changed in just 3 days. "Are you sure you're ready for tomorrow?" she asked, her hand warm in mine despite the December chill. "I've been getting ready for this my whole life," I replied. "I just didn't know it." We went through our final checklist: security cameras operational, important documents secured, family members notified of timing, legal counsel on standby. Everything was in place. In my childhood bedroom, I slept surprisingly well. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had done everything I could to prepare. More importantly, I knew I was doing the right thing, not just for me, but for Walter, for Dylan, and even, in a way, for my parents themselves. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling destructive behavior. Morning came quickly. Dylan helped Walter prepare a simple breakfast while I checked and rechecked our preparations. Haley set up the living room with enough seating for everyone who would be arriving. At 10:17 a.m., the security camera alerted us to a car pulling into the driveway. My parents had arrived several hours earlier than expected. I took a deep breath, looked at Walter, Dylan, and Haley, my true family, and nodded. "Let's do this." The sound of keys rattling in the front door echoed through the silent house. I stood in the living room, Haley beside me, Walter in his armchair, and Dylan leaning against the wall, a united front. The door swung open, and my parents stumbled in, looking tanned but tired from their shortened vacation. They froze when they saw us all waiting. "Mason," my mother said, recovering quickly and moving forward with her arms outstretched. "We've been so worried. Why haven't you been answering our calls?" "Dylan needs—" She stopped mid-sentence when I stepped back from her attempted embrace. "Sit down, Mom, Dad," I said, gesturing to the couch. "We need to talk." My father's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene: the formal arrangement of chairs, the folder of documents on the coffee table, the unfamiliar security cameras in the corners of the room. "What's going on here?" he demanded, making no move to sit. "An intervention," I replied calmly. "Please sit down." "An intervention?" My mother laughed, though it sounded forced. "Don't be dramatic, Mason. We just need to sort out this misunderstanding about the money." "It's more than that," Walter said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "Much more." The doorbell rang, and Haley went to answer it. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Curtis entered, followed by my father's brother Michael and his wife Susan. The look of confusion on my parents' faces deepened. "What is this, a family reunion?" my father asked, trying to sound jovial but failing to hide his growing unease. "In a way," I replied. "Everyone here has been affected by your actions. We're here to talk about it honestly, as a family." My mother's smile faltered. "I don't know what you think we've done, but—" "Mom!" I interrupted gently but firmly. "Please stop. The lying stops today." For the next hour, I laid out the evidence methodically. The unauthorized withdrawal from my account, the pattern of borrowing money from family members using Dylan's medical condition as justification, the financial mismanagement that had led to their massive debt, the manipulation and lies that had isolated family members from each other. As I spoke, my mother's expressions cycled through indignation, denial, and finally, when faced with irrefutable evidence, a kind of calculating assessment. My father simply stared at the floor, his face reddening. "We've spoken with Dylan's doctor," I continued. "We know there was no emergency treatment, no special clinic in Mexico. We know his condition is stable and manageable with regular care." Dylan stepped forward then. "You've been using me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Making me think I was sicker than I am. Using my condition to get money from everyone. Making me dependent on you." My mother turned to him, reaching out. "Sweetie, no. We've only ever wanted what's best for you." "What's best for me?" Dylan's voice rose. Was it best for me to miss college applications? To have no friends because you convinced me I was too fragile? To believe I was bankrupting our family? My father finally spoke, his voice defensive. We've sacrificed everything for this family. Everything. And this is the thanks we get? A public humiliation? This isn't about humiliating you, I said. It's about accountability. You stole from me. You've borrowed money from everyone in this room under false pretenses. You've neglected Grandpa's health needs while using his pension. You've isolated Dylan and stunted his independence. My mother's strategy shifted. Tears filled her eyes. We made mistakes. We were desperate. Can't you understand that? We're your parents, Mason. We raised you. We gave you everything. And I've been paying it back ever since, I replied, refusing to be swayed by the familiar guilt tactic. But that stops now. I opened the folder and removed the documents Marcus had prepared. These are your options, I explained, placing the papers on the coffee table. Option 1, I file formal fraud charges for the unauthorized withdrawal from my account. Given the evidence, you would likely face criminal charges. My father started to protest, but I held up my hand. Option 2, you agree to the terms outlined here. You'll repay all family members according to this schedule. You'll attend financial counseling and therapy. You'll grant Dylan the independence to make his own medical and life decisions. You'll respect the boundaries we're establishing today. The room fell silent as my parents stared at the documents. This is extortion, my father finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Uncle Curtis interjected. It's an opportunity. We want to help you, but we can't keep enabling behavior that hurts everyone, including yourselves. My mother picked up the papers, scanning them with narrowed eyes. And if we refuse? Then we all walk away, I said simply. Every person in this room will cut financial ties with you completely. I'll proceed with the fraud charges. And Dylan comes with me to Seattle. That last part wasn't something we had discussed as a group, but as I said it, heads nodded around the room. My mother's eyes widened as she realized the unified front she was facing. You can't take him, she began, but Dylan interrupted. I'm 22, Mom. I can make my own decisions. And I've decided I want a fresh start. The next 2 hours were intense. My parents cycled through all the stages of defensive behavior: denial, anger, bargaining, guilt-tripping. But faced with overwhelming evidence and a united family, their position weakened steadily. Walter, who had been relatively quiet, finally spoke up. Linda, Paul, he addressed my parents, I loved your mother more than anything in this world. Before she died, she made me promise to look after this family. I thought that meant giving you whatever you asked for. I was wrong. It meant making sure the family stayed healthy, all of us. This has to stop. Something in Walter's words seemed to reach my father in a way nothing else had. He looked at his father-in-law, then around at the family gathered in the room, and finally at my mother. We need to think about this, he said quietly. You have until tomorrow, I replied. The family will come back at noon for your decision. As everyone prepared to leave, my mother caught my arm. You don't understand what it's been like, she whispered. The pressure, the expenses, keeping up appearances. I looked into her eyes, seeing not the manipulator of the past few days but the mother who had once read me bedtime stories and bandaged my scraped knees. I do understand, Mom. That's why I'm doing this. Because continuing on this path will destroy you, and I love you too much to watch that happen. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of the real person behind the manipulative facade, scared, overwhelmed, and possibly, just possibly, grateful that someone had finally said, enough. My parents left to stay at a hotel, declining Walter's offer to use their own bedroom while they considered their options. As the door closed behind them, the tension in the house dissipated like air from a punctured balloon. That went better than expected, Haley said, squeezing my hand. Dylan looked shell-shocked but relieved. Do you think they'll agree? They don't have much choice, I replied. But more importantly, they need this. Whether they realize it yet or not. Walter nodded slowly. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Mason. She always said you had a backbone of steel under all that kindness. That night, the four of us ordered pizza and watched old movies, deliberately avoiding discussion of the confrontation or what might happen tomorrow. It was like the calm after a storm, peaceful, if a bit surreal. Just before midnight, I received a text from my father. We'll sign the agreement, but we want to talk to you alone first. I showed it to Haley, who looked concerned. It's a tactic, she said. They want to get you alone so they can manipulate you without witnesses. I know, I replied. But I'm not the same person they could manipulate before. I texted back. 11 a.m. here. With Haley present. Then everyone arrives at noon as planned. His response came quickly. Fine. As I set my phone aside, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. The relationship with my parents would never be the same after today. But maybe, just maybe, it could eventually become something healthier for all of us. 3 days after the confrontation, my parents returned to the house. They had signed the agreement, committed to financial counseling, and promised to respect the new boundaries we had established. But the tension in their expressions told me they were still searching for a way to regain control. We've been thinking, my mother began, setting her purse on the kitchen counter with deliberate casualness. This whole situation has been blown out of proportion. We made a mistake, certainly, but families should forgive each other. Why don't we all start fresh? Dylan, you'll stay here where we can take care of you, and Mason, you go back to your job in Seattle. We can put this unfortunate episode behind us. I exchanged glances with Dylan and Walter. This was exactly what we had anticipated, an attempt to restore the old dynamic, to separate us and regain their position of authority. That's not how this works anymore, I said calmly. The agreement you signed isn't just a piece of paper. It represents real change. We signed under duress, my father countered, his voice rising. Our own son threatening us with criminal charges. What choice did we have? The same choice you've always had, Walter said, standing from his chair with more energy than I'd seen from him in years. To be honest. To respect boundaries. To treat family with love instead of seeing them as resources to exploit. My parents looked stunned at Walter's directness. In the past, he had always been the easiest to manipulate, the quickest to give in to their demands. Dylan stepped forward. I'm moving to Seattle with Mason next week. I've already spoken with a rheumatologist there who's taking me as a patient. And I've applied for an online design program. This is ridiculous. My mother snapped, her calm facade cracking. You can't possibly live independently with your condition. My condition is manageable with medication and occasional physical therapy. Dylan replied. Dr. Ramirez confirmed that. The only reason I've been so dependent is because you made me believe I was sicker than I am. The confrontation continued for nearly an hour, with my parents trying every manipulation tactic in their arsenal. But faced with our united front and the legally binding agreement they had signed, they eventually realized their position was untenable. Fine, my father said finally, his voice cold. If this is how you want it to be, so be it. But don't come crying to us when everything falls apart. It won't fall apart, I assured him. Because we're actually supporting each other, not exploiting each other. As my parents left to check into a hotel again, they had agreed to give Walter space in the house while he looked for his own place. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. This wasn't the family reconciliation I had hoped for when I boarded that plane to Philadelphia. But it was honest, and that was a start. Over the next few days, remarkable changes began to unfold. Walter, freed from the constant stress of my parents' manipulation, showed visible improvement in his health. His blood pressure normalized, his sleep improved. and the constant worry lines on his forehead began to soften. "I'm thinking of selling this house," he told me one morning over coffee. "Too big for one person, and too many memories. There's a nice little condo building near your place in Seattle. Might be nice to be close to my grandsons." Dylan, meanwhile, threw himself into preparations for the move with enthusiasm that bordered on giddiness. He researched art programs, joined online communities for people with his condition, and spent hours video chatting with Haley about apartment options in our neighborhood. "I never realized how much they limited me," he confessed one evening as we sorted through his belongings. "Every time I tried to become more independent, there was always some new health crisis or financial emergency that pulled me back in. My supervisor at work not only approved my extended absence but offered Dylan an interview with our design department once he completed his program. We're always looking for fresh perspectives," she said. "And I've seen his portfolio. The kid's got talent." Exactly 1 week after the confrontation, we held a different kind of family gathering. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Curtis hosted a dinner at their home, with extended family members who had been part of our support system. My parents were invited but declined to attend. "It's too soon," my mother texted. "We need time." I understood. Real change doesn't happen overnight, especially when patterns of behavior are decades in the making. The agreement gave them a structured path forward, but the emotional work would take much longer. At the dinner, surrounded by family who now understood the full story, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. These connections, once strained by my parents' triangulation and manipulation, were being rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. 6 months later, the changes in our family were profound. Walter had sold the house and purchased a condo just 10 minutes from my apartment in Seattle. He had joined a senior hiking club and reconnected with old friends via social media, his social circle expanding for the first time since my grandmother's death. Dylan had flourished in his new environment. His health remained stable, managed by a competent rheumatologist who treated him as a partner in his care rather than a passive patient. He had completed the first semester of his online program with excellent grades and had started a part-time internship in my company's design department. My parents had complied with the financial restitution plan, though often with passive-aggressive notes attached to the payments. They attended the required counseling sessions, according to the therapist's confirmations, though I had no way of knowing how genuinely they participated. Our communication remained limited to brief, formal exchanges. On a warm June evening, as Haley and I hosted a small gathering on our apartment balcony with Walter, Dylan, and friends, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The family I had flown home to at Christmas wasn't the family I had now, and that was a good thing. Walter raised his glass in a toast. "To boundaries," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "And to the courage to enforce them." We all clinked glasses, the Seattle skyline glittering behind us as the sun set. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my parents. Healing might come with time, or we might need to maintain this distance permanently. What I did know was that the cycle of exploitation and manipulation had been broken, and everyone was healthier for it. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family isn't unconditional support, it's the courage to say, enough, when patterns become destructive. Sometimes the deepest love expresses itself through boundaries rather than blind loyalty. As night fell over the city, I looked at the family I had chosen and the family that had chosen me. And I knew that no matter what happened next, we would face it together, honestly, respectfully, and with the strength that comes from true connection. If you've ever had to stand up to family manipulation or set difficult boundaries with loved ones, share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles is the first step toward healing. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being, even when it comes to family. Thank you for listening, and remember, True love never requires you to sacrifice your dignity or self-respect.